Development and Transportation Committee meeting for August 26, 2020. The purpose of the committee meetings are the city departments to pass along information to the city council and discuss initiatives on the published agenda. By ordinance, the committee consists of the mayor, members of the city council, and the city administrator. The ordinance mandates the city administrator as chair of the committee meeting. This is a public meeting, but not a public hearing. Therefore, while the meeting is open to the public, we do not take public comments or questions during the committee meeting. Public comments or questions are received at the regular council meetings held at 7 p.m. in the city council chambers on the second and fourth Monday of each month. First item on today's agenda is the approval of the minutes for the Community Development and Transportation Committee meeting for July 29th, 2020. Is there a motion? Councilor Judy?
Motion to approve.
Motion approved by Councilmember Judy. Is there a second? Second by Councilmember Kaiser. All in favor, please raise your hands. And it passes unanimous. Thank you. Moving on to community development, consideration number 2, consideration of a tree bank fund administration project list for fiscal year 2020 and approval of a budget amendment DA number 2457-1401-09-14-2020 in the amount of $639,061.96. Ms. Dial.
As you missed Robert this morning, good morning, everyone. It's okay. I'm going to share my screen with you. Give me one moment, please. If I can find it. There it is. Alright, well, my mouse is not helping me right now, so we're just going to go through it this way. So as Mr. Palmer said, this is a tree bank fund administration project list. We typically bring this to you during the late spring, early summer, and we're a little behind schedule just due to all the other things that we've been dealing with. So what we brought to you today, is just a reminder that the section 12.1.7 tree bank funds does allow for mayor and council to approve a project list for planting trees, maintaining trees, in order for us to have a healthy tree population for the public benefit. And these can be on public property or on private property within a public easement. Today, what I've got for you is our 2021 project list. It does include a transportation allocation that we continue to carry forward. It also includes some fiscal year 20 projects that you had previously approved that are either underway or just due to some scheduling issues with COVID have been pushed out a little bit. So we're rolling those over into fiscal 21. And then we've also got some new 21 projects that you've actually seen before, but we're actually bringing them forward for funding now. So just quickly, project status. The top section of the table is the transportation funds that are specific to the transportation department to use. That project is moving forward. It's a hard scrabble green loop project. They have a couple of sections of funding for transportation funds as well as some tree care funds that are, I know they can, but it won't start the slide to show. None of them are working. I've tried them all. So, okay. First making do. Sorry. So that project is moving forward. They've gotten their bids, and we expect that to be underway shortly. The rest of the bottom of the table are the other previously approved fiscal 20 projects. And what I've provided here is just the estimated funds that were previously approved by Mayor and Council, the amount that's been billed to date, and that's available. Those that are available, this was at the time I actually presented or created this slide presentation for the packet. It does change as invoices come in, so there's some minor adjustments that will be made to this once you see the final thing on your council agenda. The projects that have a balance available are recommended by the various departments to roll forward into fiscal year 21. So you'll see those again on the next couple of slides. So for the fiscal 21 projects, again, this transportation allocation of almost $56,000 is specific to the Harshkauer Green Loop project. That project is moving forward. These are previous approvals that we just want to carry forward into the fiscal 21 budget cycle. And then for the remainder of the projects, this first slide you'll see here is for recreation and parks. The projects that were previously approved, you'll see at the top of each of the note sections have a bolded date that the council approved those, and then the recommendation to carry that project forward into fiscal year 21. The ones that are new is the front entrance to Henry Park and the front entrance to Big Creek Park. Those are entrances similar to what we're doing at Roswell Area Park, where we're doing enhancements. So those are projects that were recommended to be in the fiscal year 21 list when you saw it last year, and we're just looking to bring that forward for funding in this project list. And then on the next slide, we have the transportation project. This is the remainder of the funding for the hardscrabble landscape plan for the trail project that was recently completed with the roundabout. And then we have 4 projects from Roswell Public Works. These previously were shown to you as planting and or maintenance line items. They've gone back and found 4 projects that are coming up pretty quickly, I believe, that they want to be able to use some funding for. There's the Sun Valley Drive ponds that were built as a part of the Sun Valley construction projects, and there is a significant amount of landscaping that is required to be done in the water quality sections of those ponds. And so this project is to help with the tree and some of the larger shrub plantings associated with that. And then there is a new project. It's a water quality bioretention area that's proposed here at City Hall in the parking lot. And Environmental Public Works is looking to fund some of the tree and shrub planting that will be associated with that as well. And in the transfer station, there's again some stormwater related bioretention ponds that will be required for that new construction project or reconstruction project. And there is some planting of trees and shrubs that will be associated with that. So they've asked for some funding to support that. And then there are some ponds, detention ponds here at City Hall that you may not even be aware of because there's so many trees in the area that it's not obvious. And so there's a significant amount of maintenance that's required to be done there. And so there's some maintenance funds for tree removal in order to construct that pond that Environmental Public Works has requested. And then there's one last project, and that is for just general maintenance, for stormwater maintenance, for plantings that are required in many of the existing bioretention areas that we have in parks, Roswell Area Park, Big Creek Park, etc. And so this is a lump sum for funds to use for maintaining those over the next year in those various areas that are described. So today we are requesting that this be approved for an agenda vote. Staff does, of course, recommend approval. I have gone through each of the projects with the various departments to verify that the scope that they're proposing it appears to be in compliance with the UDC requirements for how those funds can be spent. And of course, we've got the project list as well as the budget amendment request that finance put together for you. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thanks, Lenore. The floor is open. Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Gary, and thank you, Lenore. That was very informative and helpful. I just have a question on the ponds, the bioretention pond and the other ponds at the City Hall property. I recall when we had a Skillet presentation on the Skillet property, was the developer contributing to some of the development of those ponds as part of the runoff? Could you address that, please?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Yes, there is an agreement between Environmental Public Works and that developer for paying into the stormwater fund that is used for stormwater maintenance and new construction projects in the city. I honestly do not recall the dollar amount that was associated with that, but that is going to be towards the actual work for maintaining the ponds. So the amount that you're seeing there is just for assisting with planting or removal of trees. But all of the earthwork that has to be done, the reconstruction of the outfall control structure, expanding it, there's going to be a significant amount, a very large increase in capacity to that pond. And so the dollar amount that was paid by the developer would contribute towards that part of it as opposed to the whole project. It's just a small piece of it. And so this is, I'm not even sure what the total dollar amount is for the whole project, but this is a very small piece of it that's being requested as a part of the tree bank fund.
Thank you.
Councilmember Woolsey.
Thank you, Gary, and thank you, Lenore. Great presentation. I think it's a nice balanced representation of projects, and look forward to seeing them come to life, come to fruition over the next 12 to 18 months. Question overall, and this may be a question for Ryan, do you have the amounts that are actually in the tree bank fund right now and projections? Do you have a projected amount that might be coming in?
Yeah, so today, I don't know about what's coming in because I can never tell who's going to take down a tree, unfortunately. I didn't pull up the numbers, and I probably can look at it if you need to, but as of when this report was written and put together in your packet, there was almost $750,000 available in the unrestricted fund balance. And so the way we started doing this is that we drop all of the unexpended funds back in to the unrestricted and then bring back out the amount that we need for the next year. And so the 748,850 is the available amount in the fund balance, according to the finances report in your packet.
Okay. So there is some remaining balance in excess of the projects that are being proposed.
That is correct, yes.
All right, great, thank you.
Councilmember Hall.
Thank you. Just a follow-up question to Councilmember Woolsey. What is the balance in the restricted fund, and what are the restricted funds used for?
So the restricted fund is going to be assigned to the projects that you're approving in that list. So currently it'd be the fiscal year 20 projects that I gave the updated report on the status of what we've spent. And that amount that was originally approved, if I'm not mistaken, hold on, I gotta go to the right page, was about $415,000. And depending on what time of day I look, it tells me a different balance available. So there was about $350,000 still remaining to be spent. And then that would roll forward, that drops back into the fund balance, and then we bring back out the $639,000 to fund the fiscal 21 projects. So the restrictions are that the money that we are approving in this budget can only be spent on the projects that are on the list for you to approve.
So the 700 encompasses both restricted and unrestricted, with the exception of the roll forward and roll back that you can take those funds.
I believe so, but I would have to defer to finance to make sure that that is being said correctly, but I believe that's correct, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? What's the pleasure of the council?
Motion to approve.
Motion approved by Councilmember Judy. Is there a second? Second by Councilmember Woolsey. Any further questions or discussion? All in favor, please raise your hands. And it is unanimous. Thank you. Moving on, item number 3, consideration of initiations of text amendments to section 12.2 stream buffers, section 14.2 defined terms of the Unified Development Code. Ms. Romberg.
Thank you. I'm actually going to hand this over to Ms. Murray. If you give me just a second, I'm going to go to the right place and share the screen again for our presentation. It's fine. Why it's not cooperating with me easily? Ah, yes. Okay. All right. There you go.
Hello, I'm Danelle Murray. I'm the city engineer, and I'm here to talk to you about the section 12.2 stream buffer protection ordinance. The city of Roswell is a phase 1 community, and we have an MS4 permit. And as part of that permit, we are subject to the Metro District requirements. So this is part of our MS4 permit. So the Metro District, we've talked about that a number of times on other ordinances. For this part, they have a water resources management plan. The city's plan that fits in with the Metro District's plan is audited every 5 years, and our audit is this year. So this June, we received a letter, And one of the comments was that the buffer ordinance that we have in the UDC is not equivalent to a recently adopted model stream buffer ordinance. So we went through the buffer ordinance. And as part of our MS4 permit, we are required to adopt the buffer or the model ordinance or an equivalent ordinance. So we went through the ordinance and we made some changes to the model ordinance so it is consistent with the way that we do business, and that's what we're presenting here. So the overall purpose of the buffer ordinance is written out here, but it's really to protect streams. And the way that we protect streams, I'll get the next slide, is to create buffer zones along the streams and to minimize land development within these buffer zones. So the model ordinance is very similar in content to the ordinance that we have in the UDC. The buffers themselves haven't changed in width or in the way that we apply them to different streams. What has changed is the layout, and there's just a lot more information for the process for enforcing the buffers in our city. So just going through and hitting the highlights in the ordinance. In the applicability section, there's an explicit grandfathered section. This is primarily for previously approved projects. There's a long list of exemptions, longer than was in our existing ordinance, but it also is consistent with the way that we already do business. In the land development requirements, the buffer and setback requirements, that's where it actually indicates the requirements. And the variance procedures, these were in the previous ordinance, but they're listed explicitly in a lot more detail. Compatibility with other buffer regulations. This is the section that indicates that this ordinance is not intended to supersede other ordinances, for example, the MERPA ordinance, if the other ordinances are more protective. And then just going through it, we added a couple sections to the model ordinance for the land disturbance permit application and issuance to be consistent with our processes here. And then there's some additional information for the requirements, responsibility, and inspections that are more spelled out. When we get to the violations, enforcements, and penalties, this is a new section in the model ordinance that we don't have in the UDC ordinance. And that's good because we've been using the erosion and sediment control violations, enforcements, and penalties section when there are buffer violations. So with this, we'll have a tool to address actual buffer violations, not erosion and sediment control violations in the buffer. Also going down, the appeals section is more detailed, and then we have some changes in the definition section. That's the 14.2 that you'll also be considering today. We have two sections of definition changes. There's changes to the, I don't really have the slide for it. There's changes to the definitions in section 12.2 to reflect Roswell definitions, and then there's additional definitions added to section 14.2 to include the definitions in the new buffer ordinance. So those are the changes that we are asking for your agenda vote, and I am happy to address any questions you have.
Thank you, Danelle. I've got one question. Is this for us to maintain our permit? Do we have to make these changes?
This is required to maintain our MS4 permit. We do have to address the model ordinance as it stands or equivalent ordinance.
Thank you. Floor is open for questions. Councilmember Spano.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer. I would like to go back to, I guess, page 5 of your presentation, land development requirements. And number 2, variance procedures. If you can give us more detail on that. Yes, perfect. This slide.
Yeah.
Actually, if I can, I'm going to give you one moment.
Okay.
to open the actual ordinance for you, so we can go to that section.
So variance procedures, previously in our existing section, UDC section 12.2, the variances went to the Board of Zoning Appeals. They continue to go to Board of Zoning Appeals. There's a difference when you looked at these, except as provided above. I can give you a little bit of information on the two classes of variances. One thing that we do as the engineering department when there are buffers is we work with each parcel when they have some unique challenges with their buffers and what they want to do on their property. So we have the ability to provide a variance with the agreement of the BZA when we have mitigation measures to offset the effects of the proposed land development of a parcel. You see that at the bottom of bullet number 1. And so we do that now. This spells it out a little bit more explicitly.
And if I could just add real quickly, this section before, all it did was refer to our Article 13 administration section and follow the various procedures there. What this does is add some enhancements on the actual submittal that has to be made for that same variance procedure, which we didn't have before. So depending on the situation, it provides some kind of steps in the process, as well as on the following page, it goes into site map and description and documentation and so forth, and spells out the requirements of what they have to submit to us in order to apply for that variance. That is what is the biggest change between the current UDC layout and this ordinance.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Palermo.
No, I just want to make sure to clarify something I heard at the beginning. So from the sounds of it, no distances are being changed, because something I've heard from residents is they take a lot of pride in the fact that Roswell's stream buffer ordinance is more protective of green space and more protective in the environment than the state law. And from the sounds of it, that's not changing at all. And just want to make sure to confirm that.
That's right. We have some additional city buffers that we have had in place for 20 years, and those remain.
Any additional questions?
Motion to approve.
Motion to approve.
Motion approved by Councilmember Zapata. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Wilsey. Any further questions or discussion? All in favor, please raise your hands. And it is unanimous. Thank you. Moving on to item number 4, consideration to adopt revisions to the City of Roswell standard construction specification. Ms. Bromberg.
Thank you. A moment.
Is. And this is Denal again, and we have standard construction specs that are on our website available for contractors and engineers. And we're proposing, or if you go to the next section on the background, we adopted those, the City of Roswell adopted those in 2006, and there's been a couple of updates. We did a big update last year, and we want to make a couple of changes to the water section today. Go to the next one, please. The change to the text portion primarily discusses location, waterline location. There's an actual new waterline location section that's more specific. Not shown in your packet. You can see the text there. And then section 7 is the water utility construction details. There's been a number, I think something like 12 new details added to that section that support different meter size installations, backflow preventer program installation notes, and then some location plan view as well. And those are the changes that we are proposing to the stormwater, to the construction specs, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Floor is open. Is there a motion?
Motion to approve.
Motion approved by Councilmember Zapata. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Judy. Any further questions or comments? All in favor, please raise your hands. And it is unanimous. Thank you. Moving on to
Hey, Gary?
transportation.
Gary, can I ask, are all these going to the September 14th mayor and council meeting?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks, Marley. Do we want to specify that, the motion from moving forward? Is that what I'm getting?
That would help a lot. Thank you.
Okay. Moving on to transportation, item number 5, consideration to award a construction contract to Tri-Scapes Incorporated to install landscaping along the Hardscrabble Green Loop corridor in an amount not to exceed $113,585.08. Mr. Rock.
Thank you, Gary. Good morning, everyone. So let me share my screen. Can you all see it? Thank you, Gary. So the first item is the Hardscrabble landscaping contract. We are talking about the installation of about 200 trees along the corridor using the tree bank fund that you heard about a few minutes ago from ComDev. We completed the Hardscrabble Green Loop project construction about a year ago. And as part of some of the right-of-way agreements with a couple of parcels, we agreed to do some tree installation later on. And also since then, we had gotten several requests during and after the project. So the council's direction was to move forward with some kind of project to install trees. So we are finally ready for that. So we worked with the Transportation and Recreation and Parks departments, worked on a plan in-house about a year ago. It came before you at a committee meeting in July of 2019, last year, about a year ago. And it came before you for funding approval at a council meeting in November of 2019. So the landscaping plan calls for about 200 trees along the stretch of Hardscrabble Road between King Road and Idris Road, and then some along Chapin, the part of Chapin that was part of the construction project as well. So we have a higher concentration of trees around the roundabout area, but then they are spread to the rest of the project corridor. So I have the plan that you approved about a year ago. It's also included in your packet. On the top left, it has the type of trees and the number of trees for each section. So what you have on the screen now is the section of Hardscrabble Road from King Road for a few hundred feet to the west. And I have the all sheets here. This is the roundabout area, Hardscrabble and Chapin, and you see a lot more trees, and there's some shrubberies as well. And then it just continues along Hardscrabble up to Idris, and then some along Chapin, as you can see on the screen. So we received 4 bids, and staff is recommending to award to the lowest responsible bidder, which was Tri-Scapes at a cost of $113,585. And we have the funding in the tree bank fund and the tree planting program. So do you guys have any questions I can answer?
Thanks, Mohammed. Floor is open.
Motion to approve.
Motion approved by Councilmember Judy. Is there a second? Second. Second by the mayor. Any further questions or discussion? All in favor, please raise your hands. And the motion is unanimous. And I'm assuming that's to move forward to the next meeting. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Moving on to item number 6, consideration of initiation of a text amendment to section 11.4 streets of the Unified Development Code to add 2 street types. Mr. Ralph.
So I'm gonna have Rob Belrose present the next 3 UDC items, and I'll be around for any questions.
Good morning, everyone. The next 3 items are a follow-up from the work session that we had in July. We received a lot of your input from July. We've taken all that input and we've made changes to our recommendations. So some of the information you're about to see is different from what you saw in July. I will try and highlight those changes for you. We have also split the entire work session that we did into 3 separate initiations for text amendments, thinking that there may be varying support for one more than the other. We didn't want to bundle them all together. So the first one is probably the easiest of the 3. The first item is initiation for 2 new road types into our road section list. Quick background, which I've already told you, all 3 of these items are a follow-up from the work session that we had on July 13th. What I'm about to show you are 2 new road sections. We recommend adding local street rural section as 11.4.10, and we recommend adding a collector version of that same section, collector street 2 lanes rural section, street type to 11.4.11. The next 2 slides are pictures of what we propose to add. The easiest way for me to describe this is a low volume, local 2-lane road with no curb and gutter. Currently, we don't have this section in the UDC. It is not very common in the city, but we do have some examples of this. You'll notice that the planting area, 5 feet, is probably a little bit larger than what we would normally do if we had curb and gutter. That's to provide a larger distance between the travel lanes and the sidewalk. But we do that when we don't have that curb and gutter providing the barrier. So the section you see, 11.4.10, is the lower volume local street version of a standard 2-lane road, sidewalks on both sides with no curb and gutter. The next picture, 11.4.11, is a beefed up version of the previous graphic. All we've done is add bike lanes. This is a collector version of a 2-lane road with no curb and gutter. You'll see that we have a maintenance strip behind the sidewalk. We have 6-foot sidewalks for collectors and above based on your guidance from the work session. That 6-foot varies to 10-foot depending on which road we're looking at, following the already adopted guidelines in the UDC dictating whether we're looking at a sidewalk or a multi-use trail. So the sidewalk will vary between 6 and 10. The planting area, the minimum is 5. Ideally, we like to increase that, is why we provided a range there. And then we have, for travelway, we provided a minimum 4-foot bike lane and a minimum 11-foot travel lane. Just for recap for you, so we're at a text amendment initiation for committee meeting this morning. If approved, we will bring this forward to initiation to council. Then we will move forward with planning commission, followed by first and second reading. Available for any questions you might have.
Thanks, Rob. Floor is open. Councilman Palermo.
Thank you. So I appreciate the presentation, the updates and the illustrations, definitely very helpful. So I realize there's certainly some older roads that would have the no curb and gutter, but I guess the concern I have is I've definitely witnessed and spoke with a number of residents who have had stormwater issues, whether there was a curb and gutter that just wasn't necessarily directing the water properly, or there wasn't one, but nonetheless end up seeing stormwater issues causing issues to their house, their driveway, etc. And so I guess with all these, anytime we're looking at something new, I guess help me understand what is the benefit to residents by adding this street type? Because isn't it creating just an additional stormwater risk?
Adding these two sections to our UDC, I wouldn't say adds any additional stormwater risk to our residents at all. This is an acknowledgement that we do have these sections already existing in our city, and it gives the developers the option to choose whether they do a curb and gutter longitudinal drainage system, or whether they would typically have a more rural ditch section. Councilmember Palermo, this has been a conversation topic. Mayor Henry probably knows what I'm talking about. Over the past 10 or 15 years, there's been a lot of discussion on kind of a more urban versus a more rural flair to some of our roads, and transportation has tried to, over the years, where some of the roads have traditionally been rural with larger ditches along the side instead of a more urban curb and gutter. We have tended towards leaving the rural sections rural and leaving the urban sections urban, and not transforming one into the other. The perfect example of that is Hardscrabble Road. When we were preparing the concept for Hardscrabble, and we were going through the public involvement process and sharing concepts with this body, we intentionally tried to preserve as much of that no curb and gutter rural flair to Hardscrabble as we could. Yes, you're correct. We have stormwater issues around the city all the time. I just don't think adding these two sections to the UDC changes transportation or public works' ability to work those stormwater and drainage issues with individual parcels as they come up over time.
First bottom.
Thank you. So I have a kind of follow-up question. What is the need of this? You can be more specific. What is the need of your initiative here today? Point number one. Point number two, really is a concern for me that you expressed having no gutter. And we know what happened, and here, especially this year with all the rain we have and the stormwater issues that we have. So, and we do have in the past administration and the previous transportation director who decided to eliminate, in some cases, the gutters, and then raising the asphalt to eliminate the gutters, and then almost getting to the same level of the driveway of the residents, and created problems that then we solved. So having this experience, I'm really concerned about you trying to eliminate gutters. And then the second one is about the no curb and how this will affect the safety by not having curbs on the two proposed roads that you're bringing here today to council. So I have those 3 points. What is the need of this initiative? Having no gutters and having no curb, how will be the negative impacts to the residents?
So 3 questions, and I'll provide 3 answers. First question, the purpose. The reason why staff is initiating this request to add these 2 roads is again an acknowledgement that these 2 roads exist already in the city. If after this meeting, if you would like me to share with you a couple of the examples of where these roads currently exist, I'd be happy to do that. I don't have that at this time. It's an acknowledgement that these road types with no curb and gutter, both on a local version and in a collector version, already exist in the city. ComDev is aware, and we deal with requests coming through a pre-application process and projects that come to you. We have been getting requests from projects to look at a more rural section and not propose curb and gutter. We wanted to provide that option as a section in the UDC. There is no urgency. It's an ongoing issue that we've been working with community development over the past several years. It's just been a lack of a street type and a lack of a picture for a developer to understand, if I don't want to provide that more urban look to a road and install a traditional gutter with a curb behind it, here's what the offsets and here's what the sidewalk width and here's what those elements would look like in a more rural setting. Second point, this discussion we're having today, whether we include the 2 new road types in the UDC, has absolutely nothing to do with the resurfacing question with the gutter that Councilmember Zapata that you brought up. And we've discussed this a couple of times, I think in committee and internally and with you. Yes, previous administrations during our resurfacing timeline and resurfacing discussion, we have been listening to the bike community, and in some locations, we have been trying to resurface up to the gutter and provide more of a bikeable shoulder in some roads in the city. We are no longer doing that. We are spending our resurfacing money on milling roads the correct way and reclaiming those gutters. So that issue, over time, we will be using our resurfacing money, and we no longer follow that practice. Mohammed's sitting over here to my right. If he has anything to add on that, he'll let me know when I'm finished talking here. Third discussion, any safety issue associated with the curb. I agree with you that there is a perceived safety issue if I'm a pedestrian walking on a sidewalk. I agree with you that that curb does provide a little bit of comfort factor for safety for someone walking. And that's exactly why when we're looking at a rural section, if you'd like me to bring the picture back up, I can point this out to you. For rural sections like we're talking about adding here, we have a wider grass strip. So the grass strip between the travel lanes and the cars, if there is no curb, our minimum offset between cars and pedestrians is larger than what we would typically do if there was a curb there. The grass strip with the curb is on the neighborhood of a minimum of 2 feet versus the grass strip for a more rural setting without curb and gutter is 5 feet or larger. I hope I answered all 3 of your questions.
Mayor Henry.
I would like to add a little history to this. We've got roads in the city of Roswell that are, as was pointed out by staff, rural. And one example I will give you is Jones Road. And about 10 years ago, there was a movement on a previous council that was going to urbanize Jones Road by adding a different set of stormwater requirements, curb and gutter, et cetera, which was not in keeping with the landscape of the area. So for example, Jones Road has no curb and gutter. They've got swales or ditches on the each side of the road that provides a stormwater for that road. And let's say one of the properties along Jones Road is 10 acres, and it's going to be developed as a small subdivision off of Jones Road. This recognizes that this is an acceptable type of road in Roswell, and it is in keeping with that streetscape, so to speak. So just think of Jones Road, and Jones Road, the folks that live on Jones Road, around Jones Road, do not want the city of Roswell to come along and put in different stormwater facilities and curb and gutter, because it is in keeping with the rural aspects of the road. So this is just really recognizing the fact that these roads do exist in Roswell. And if you're going to come in and do some infill development, that is a possibility. And it's not, we're taking away that perception that the city is going to require curb and gutter everywhere within the city of Roswell, because that's a new way of doing things. This recognizes the fact that we respect the rural streetscape of many of our roads here in Roswell.
Councilmember Clermont.
Thank you. So I definitely agree. I think half of Jones Road is, or probably more than half of Jones Road is a great example. And so I'm very aware we have examples where this exists today. And I could see myself possibly supporting this, but I think there's some things that need to be, I would need to discuss and understand better before I fully support it. Because first off, I want to understand, I want to have Public Works involved in this discussion regarding stormwater to make sure that for that example, if say a 10-acre property gets turned into a new subdivision, I'd want to understand that within that subdivision, are we going to be opening up homeowners to more future risk of stormwater, if we're not doing the curb and gutter, because is that a best practice? Because again, I've had to have many conversations over the last 4.5 years with different homeowners that have been impacted with stormwater. So that's one thing that I think I would want to really better understand. Number two, it's my understanding that if it's in the UDC, it's not about existing roads. It's about the example if off Jones Road, a developer wants to take a 10-acre property and build a new street, new subdivision. That is my understanding. The UDC and these street types are for what future ones are available. And I want to make sure that we're doing best practices from that standpoint regarding stormwater, et cetera. Because, for example, we have properties that have no sidewalks. We have properties that have 0-foot setbacks. But at the same time, we also acknowledge that's not the best practice. So for future developments, that's not what we want to see, and that's what our UDC reflects. And so kind of my last thing, I mentioned one thing I'd want to see is really have that discussion with Public Works and stormwater to really understand, is this acceptable or creating more risk? The second thing I'd want to make sure we're including the UDC is which densities are appropriate to truly have that rural street. Because I'm thinking another area, the mayor brought up Jones Road, which I think is a good example. Another example I'll actually bring up is Cox Road. So the Cox Road area has a very rural feel and probably already has a number of roads that are like this, and I think they're appropriate for that area. And there's also a lot less density and a lot less really impactful development, because what I've learned from stormwater is the more impactful the development, the higher the density development, the more impervious surface you're potentially getting, as well as the more stormwater runoff you're getting. So this is something I feel I could support, but I want to make sure that we're truly defining what's rural, and not that we're putting rural roads in an area where there potentially is higher density, more stormwater runoff, and therefore more risk to both the people that would move into the new houses, as well as all the existing residents that then have to live with the impact of new stormwater runoff. So those would be some things that I would need to be able to support this.
Councilmember Palermo, my hope is that we'd be able to address those at council for initiation. If ultimately, if this item is forwarded to council, we will be prepared to address those then.
And so I just want to be clear. So my two things are clear. Number one is a public discussion with stormwater from Public Works, discussing what are the best practices, what opens us up to more risk and less risk regarding stormwater. And number two, addressing the intensity of the development and the density, et cetera, to make sure that if we are going to add a new option of rural roads for new developments, to make sure that we're doing it where it truly is more rural and less impactful regarding stormwater.
Yes, sir, we understand. We'll have conversations with Public Works and with community development before council.
Mayor Henry.
I would like to add that during the development process, all of our departments weigh in on best practices. So when a development comes forward, environmental and public works, transportation, every department weighs in on those projects. And we've got some fine professionals that will be dealing with this that I personally don't think, well, let me just leave that alone. But the other thing is for example, if you want to build a house on Jones Road, you're just a homeowner, you want to build a house. Right now, you would be required in front of your house to put curb and gutter. So is that what we want? Do we want streets that go from no curb and gutter to curb and gutter to no curb and gutter to curb and gutter? So this really is allowing more flexibility and cost savings to a homeowner that's developing just a single parcel.
Councilmember Wiltie.
Yes, thank you, and thanks again for the presentation and discussion. My question is about the sidewalks and the range that is shown. Given the character and the location of some of these rural roads, I can see where, a 5-foot sidewalk might be appropriate, but a larger one would completely change the character of the area, not to mention really come into some of the properties that are there. How would the exact width be determined? Is the 10-foot width reserved only for those that are a part of the biped plan? And we would try to stay with towards the lower end of the range? Or I guess, it seems to me like some measure of context and character needs to be applied when the width of the sidewalk is decided upon. And I think, we might be able to be a little bit more specific about it, knowing the character of the roads and the purpose of this type of street.
So Councilmember Wills, to answer your question, the intent by staff and the two graphics that we've provided, I hope you can see my screen for the first one. This is the local street. We're showing D sidewalk. We're showing a range of 5 to 10 feet. And yes, the intent on that from staff's perspective is that for local streets, the sidewalk would be 5 feet. And where code requires it to be upgraded per code, whether it's primarily for local streets, it's going to be the hub and spoke map. Those sidewalks would be upgraded to 10 feet where code requires. For the second graphic, it is the exact same thing, but for collectors, it is obviously more common for collectors to be on the hub and spoke map than it will be for the local streets. So for the collectors, we're following your guidance from the work session, and we're showing for collectors a minimum sidewalk width of 6 feet that would be upgraded to 10 where the code requires based on the hub and spoke map.
Okay, I guess I just wonder if that could be a little bit more clear if it was specified at the typical minimum and then the exception, rather than show range.
So we can discuss how to more clearly show that. I do want to point out one thing real quickly, and this may be a question. This came up in the work session that may be appropriate to answer your question, Councilmember Wilsey. We had a long discussion at the work session about pinch points and varying sidewalk width around, and the examples we talked about were large specimen trees, or to minimize a wall height, or to remove a wall altogether, or to get around a utility pole. I do think staff's intent is to do exactly what we talked about at the work session and respect the topography and respect the existing conditions, and potentially for not just these two rural sections, across all of our sections based on the guidance we heard from you in July, make pitch points and narrow through the smallest length possible to get around some of those key features that we want to preserve.
Right, okay, thank you.
Councilmember Spano.
Well, great discussion, great points that make me think a lot here. I appreciate all that. And so, going back to the character of so-called rural roads, I believe that at the moment you put a sidewalk in there, this rural character is pretty much gone. Which is, I'm not saying it's good, it's bad, it's just what it is. I haven't been many rural roads that have sidewalks anywhere. So the moment that you allow to put sidewalks, you already change the character. You already have pedestrian walking by, pushing strollers, and then at the same time, we allow the sidewalk, but then we don't allow the curb that, you like it or not, for a second distracted driver, the curb helps. The curb helps to correct the direction of the car. If for 1 second, for whatever reason, you get distracted, you don't run into the sidewalk. So I understand the idea to keep a rural road character, but the moment that you allow a sidewalk, the character change. So then if we're going to change the character, getting a little curb there and getting a little gutter for water, stormwater control doesn't really change much. You already have the sidewalk. So, so saying that, I'm not convinced right now, this minute, that getting rid of these gutters and the curb is the best solution once you have a sidewalk there. I think that, I believe that if you don't have a sidewalk, that's fine, makes sense, keep it rural as it was. But if you change the character, do all the measurement for safety and water control. Also, I think that I support actually Council Member Palermo comment, say that why don't we involve Public Works right now in the discussion now, not at the end when the issue occur, when someone apply, when, why don't we give all the thoughts from, transportation, community development, and Public Works right now, this minute, to cover all the angles and make sure that the legislation moving forward minimize any non-declared consequence.
So if I could speak very quickly to those 2 points, Councilmember Zapata, yes, we will be proceeding and discussing this with Public Works in advance of council if this body's pleasure is to move it forward for initiation for council meeting. To your first point really quickly, based on current code, we do not designate between urban and rural areas in our city when we have sidewalk requirements. So based on current code, there are no provisions telling a single family home or telling a development off Cox Road, for example. The parcel on Cox Road and the sidewalk requirements that we would be looking at for a new single family home on Cox Road or in that northern part of the city is no different than someone building a single family home on Chapin Road or building a single family home on Riverside. So we do have examples currently and through the years of parcels building sidewalks on roads without curb and gutter. Another great example of that is what we just finished on Hartscrabble. Some of that is urban and some of that is rural. So that's happening based on current code right now. All we are doing for this proposal is providing a section in our UDC to respect the fact that code is requiring this and showing the developers and showing the engineers what those widths and what that road needs to look like when done properly. I hope that explained it.
Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Gary. My comment is, I mean, we've heard about the safety issues. I would propose that the minimum sidewalk width is 6 feet on both the local streets and the collector streets on these new street types of rural, just for the safety and to speak to Roswell being a walkable city. And I understand Councilmember Zapata's comments that sidewalks do change the character of a rural area, but if we're going to put sidewalks, we should have a minimum of 6 feet on those rural local streets.
Councilmember Palermo.
Thank you, Administrator Palmer. I actually think this is one of the most productive conversations we've had in the last few years. So I want to actually expand on a couple of things that I agree and disagree on. I think Councilmember Wilsey said something I agree 100% with that I want to expand on. Mayor Henry said something I think I agree 95% with, and I actually have some disagreements with Councilman Zapata and Councilmember Hall, but want to kind of expand on those as well. So first off, I think throughout seeing the range of the 5 through 10, I feel like it is a little confusing, and I actually kind of agreed with Councilmember Wilsey's comment that, for example, for the local rural, I personally think it probably should show as 5 with an asterisk reminding that if it's on this, blah blah blah, then it ends up being a multi-use path. Because I was thinking if it's 5 to 10, if I'm the developer, I'm thinking, oh, I'm going to do 5, and then you tell me I have to do 10 because it's multi-use path. I was thinking, no, it was a range I get to choose. So I actually agree 100% with Councilmember Wellesley, as long as we're crystal clear that if it's on this map, then it's a multi-use trail. The mayor brought up, I thought, an excellent point regarding Jones Road, that if if a homeowner decides to, redevelop their house or something along those lines, should they be required to put in curb and gutter? And I believe for an example like Jones Road or Cox Road, et cetera, I lean towards thinking that they should not. But I feel that way with the caveat that I strongly believe we need to put some definitions and some clarity in the code on what allows that and what doesn't. Because although we do have staff through a pre-app procedure and their approval or denial recommendations, I think all of us could find a number of unpopular developments that have occurred in the city that, although they had that full staff review, they came out suboptimally. And I think a big reason why is, as we hear from legal, the UDC becomes a legal document. So what ends up happening is if we just blanket allow rural no curb and gutter, through the city without having clear definitions of when it's appropriate and when it isn't, what will happen is a developer will come forward to staff. They'll say, we're going to develop this new neighborhood. We're going to put in rural streets. And even though staff knows, wait a minute, this level of intensity, this level of density, that's going to be an issue around stormwater. That's going to create some other issues. That's not really what council intended with the rural definition. At the same time, the developer is going to know, and our legal is going to point out, but the code just gives that as a choice. It can't be subjective, with it, and therefore the developer will be allowed to build that rural for that higher intensity one. So that's where I stand by in the UDC to make sure that we're protecting our residents, both existing as well as new residents that would be buying into some of these newer neighborhoods. I feel we really do have to define the appropriate intensity and density to have the rural. With that, I do feel some extremely rural streets certainly do not have a sidewalk, and it is just the grass. At the same time, I have seen some examples of what staff has produced in the illustration, so I have seen these as well. Councilmember Hall brings up a good point that if we're not going to have curb, as Councilmember Sabaji said as well, then is that creating a safety risk? In which case, that could be justification for these six feet. At the same time, if it's truly local within a neighborhood, I am supportive of 5 feet. With the illustration, it showed trees, which would add pedestrian safety as well. I'm not sure if that's a requirement or not, but so I just wanted to kind of share where I thought this. Again, I thought Jones Road existing redevelopment is a fantastic point, but I do feel this council has some work to do to make sure that we're making sure the rural roads without the curb and gutter are truly going where they belong and not going where it's going to create a larger stormwater issue.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments? So it sounds like we're going to defer for the next committee meeting to have further discussions on this. Is there a motion to that effect?
Make a motion to defer to the next committee meeting.
Motion to defer to the next committee meeting by Councilmember Hall. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Second by Councilmember Palermo. Any further questions or comments?
I've got a clarification question.
Mayor?
That would be the next transportation committee meeting, not the next committee meeting, correct?
That's what I'm assuming, the next transportation committee meeting.
Correct. Apologies. The next transportation committee meeting.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments? All in favor, please raise your hands. And it is unanimous. Thank you. We've got item number 7, consideration of initiation of the text amendment to section 11.4, streets to modify existing street types. Mr. Rolfe or Del Rolfe.
Thank you, Gary. Next item, council, is a little bit longer, so I'll try to get through this as quickly as we can. This next amendment is to modify many of the existing street sections already in code. So if you remember from our work session from in July, the two biggest reasons we're making a lot of these changes. One was the applicability to the International Fire Code, which is already part of the UDC. There were several elements in these sections, most notably the road width that we needed to fine tune to bring that into compliance with the International Fire Code. There are several changes we are making to bring our sections into alignment with current code, most notably the bike ped plan and the hub and spoke maps. So we're addressing those features. There are also several sections that we're bringing elements like sidewalk width, maintenance strip, bike lane into compliance with the minimum widths that we would recognize as best practices. And I will do my best to highlight those changes and the purposes as we go forward with this. I do want to call your attention to one change that we've made from what you saw in July, and we actually just spoke about it in the previous item. Based on your recommendations from July work session, what we're showing you today has 6 foot minimum sidewalk width on all sections, collectors and above. So the guidance the guidance and the recommendation we brought to you in work session in July, where we were reducing some of those sidewalk widths for collectors and above, you very unanimously told us you weren't interested in that, and we have eliminated that change. So as I move forward, collectors and above will all start with a minimum sidewalk width of 6 feet. We do have local roads staying at 5 feet, and you'll see that as well. And we're interested in seeing what the guidance is from you on that. And we'll take whatever guidance we hear from you today and either discuss it again next month or bring it forward to you, council. So starting off, 11410A is the narrowest section we have in the city. And as we go forward, you'll see that these widths basically steadily increase. Local Street A residential is a very common road you would see with not a striped yellow center line. This is a very common local road you will see in subdivisions. The only change we are making here to G is we are striking through parallel parking. Since we wouldn't strike parallel spots here, it would still be allowed per code, but we're going to eliminate some of the cars on that section, and we're going to provide a range 10.5 to 12 feet that complies with the guidance we had in the International Fire Code. If later you would like me to refresh your memory on that, I will. There is very strict guidance in the International Fire Code that provides a minimum road width that includes basically the gutter width as part of the road width, and that's why that range varies. So in a situation where there is no gutter, we have to have the road width that complies with that minimum width for IFC, but if there is a gutter, we can count it towards that. That's why you have the travel lane reduction. If you don't mind, I'd like to go through all the graphics and then we'll get questions at the end. Next graphic, this is a similar version of what you just saw with stripes on street parking. Changes we are making, we are reducing the maintenance strip from 5 feet to 1. That is C on the graphic. That is the width behind the sidewalk. So basically the width between the sidewalk and the right of way. I don't have a good explanation for why that is currently 5 feet. The standard we have been applying for many years and the good practice for us to move forward with is we just need basically 1 foot behind the sidewalk to set where that right of way line would be. The sidewalk minimum D in the graphic, we would recommend changing from 6 to 5 to 10 with an asterisk. This is what we had included in the previous item with the text down you see below. The 5 foot basically minimum standard that would be increased to 10 if they comply with any of the code requirements, most notably for local streets, it would be the presence on the hub and spoke map, or if building heights on the road are in excess of 30 feet, which is IFC code. Part E, we are reducing from 6 to 5 feet just to provide uniformity across our sections. And then the H section travel lane is a range based on width, 10, 12, or 13 to comply with fire code recommendations. 11.4.10, this is a version of our local street graphic in the historic district that is very similar to what you saw in A. Changes we are making D to sidewalk, 5 to 10 with the asterisk that you see below, as well as travel lane recommendations to comply with International Fire Code. We're saying basically allowable would be 10 to 12, either 10, 12, or 13. Next, we move up to the collectors. So these are the existing graphics in the code that we're recommending changes to. Changes include changing the D sidewalk from 6, it is currently showing as 6, we would be showing it from 6 to 10, to acknowledge that some of these collectors are on the hub and spoke map. We are eliminating E. E is called utility placement, so that is an area in between a planting area and the sidewalk that we typically don't see in very many roads here in Roswell, and it's honestly, it's kind of a duplication with the planting area anyway. We feel that showing a 5-foot planting area behind the curb before the sidewalk more closely matches the sections we have elsewhere in current code. Planting area, we are reducing from 6 to 5. Curb and gutter stays. Bike lane, we're reducing from 5 feet to 4 feet. 4-foot bike lanes is the minimum that we see in our manuals that is best practice across the country as a minimum travel way for bike lanes. Is there value for increasing that width particular to a specific road with a higher speed limit or a specific road with a higher volume? Absolutely. But the way staff treats these sections is basically the sidewalk width, the lane widths, the bike lanes, the grass strips, everything we apply in these documents are the minimums, and to follow in that vein, to be consistent, we think we should be showing 4-foot bike lanes as the minimum, which we recognize is safe. That wouldn't prohibit staff's projects, future capital projects with concept plans approved by you, or from us specifically looking at a specific development and having a discussion on that specific road and potentially needing a wider bike lane on a case-by-case basis. We just strongly feel that if we're talking about minimums, that we would want to make sure that we show a consistent 4-foot bike lane across all sections. Construction-wise, for past capital projects by the city, I'll include Eves Road in this, I'll include Hardscrabble, and I'll include Willio. 4-foot bike lanes is the practice that we've been constructing most recently over the past 10 years. Moving forward, collector streets with parallel parking. This is going to start to get redundant, so I'm going to try and go through this quickly. Sidewalk, we are showing a 6-foot minimum with a asterisk going up to 10 based on presence on the hub and spoke map, with a 5-foot planting area and a 4-foot bike lane. As we move up from collectors into minor arterials, the change would be sidewalk. Instead of showing 6 feet, we are showing 6 or 10 with the asterisk referencing the hub and spoke map. Planting area, we are reducing from 7 to 5, and bike lane, we are reducing from 6 to 4. Another similar graphic, a 4-lane minor arterial with parallel parking and a median down the middle. Only change here is we are taking a bike lane, which is currently in code at 6 feet, we are reducing it to 4. Principal arterials, these are primarily our state routes. So this is a 5-lane section. Most notably, this is what you'll see in the old Midtown LCI project. This is 9 north of City Hall. Maintenance strip, per previous discussion, we're reducing that. That is the strip outside the sidewalk to the right of way. We are reducing from 5 to 1. Sidewalk, it is currently at 6 feet. We are including 6 or 10. Based on the fact that it could be one of the 3 roads that require 10-foot sidewalks, State Route 9, Golden Bridge, or Crossville, or it could be on the hub and spoke map, which would also kick it out 10 feet. We are clarifying that we are indicating on the graphic you see at the top of the screen that the sidewalk D could be either 6 or 10, and that could apply theoretically to both sides of that road. So the need for E, that label for multi-use path, goes away entirely. So we're striking that through, and we're handling basically the question for whether it's a sidewalk or it's a multi-use path with D entirely, with that note at the bottom. No other changes on this graphic. Next graphic is a 6-lane section, principal arterial. This is usually what you would see on Golden Bridge. Maintenance strip, again, we would be reducing from 5 back down to 1. Sidewalk would be maintained at a 6-foot minimum or a 10-foot if code requires a multi-use path. And again, we would be handling that sidewalk question entirely with D, so we can strike through that E label entirely. Access ways, this is a very minor change, and this is bringing this in compliance with International Fire Code. Based on building heights, there is a possibility that that width would need to increase to 26 width, and all we are doing is addressing that in text. Last picture, this was a discussion and work session that I wanted to make sure I hit with you. If there are any change to minimum sidewalk widths here right now, most notably for collectors and above. So we're talking about requiring a 6-foot minimum sidewalk on all collectors and above if it passes as we proposed here. The way staff has interpreted sidewalks over the years, and the way we will continue doing so unless you tell us otherwise, is that for all projects, whether it is a single family home or whether it is a development, we do not accept sidewalk widening. So if there is an existing 5-foot sidewalk, we do not accept adding a foot behind it. And the reason why we do not accept that are the pictures you see on the screen. It is a maintenance nightmare. It is impossible for us to prevent what you see on the screen from happening. Luckily, these pictures are not from the city of Roswell, and what we are doing is to try and prevent this from happening. For whatever you decide as our sidewalk widths, unless you tell us otherwise, we always require a complete removal and demolition of the existing sidewalk and construction of the brand new sidewalk in its place. So there, if it is approved as we propose, there will be situations out there in the future where we have a fairly good condition 5-foot sidewalk that meets ADA on a collector, and it would have to be removed, completely demoed, and a new 6-foot sidewalk would be built in its place to avoid the issues we've shown you on these graphics. Reminder of the timeline, this is initiation at committee. If moved forward, we have initiation at council, followed by planning commission and 2 readings. That concludes my presentation, and I'm open for questions.
Councilman Claremont.
Thank you for the detailed presentation. So I've got 3 comments. One comment is where you looked at lane width and widening for the more local rules based on the International Fire Code. I would want to be positive that it's going to be the minimum for the fire code, because in other words, if the minimum ends up being 10 feet for a very small local neighborhood road, I wouldn't want to be requiring 12 or something along those lines. So that's my first comment. My second comment is I'll basically be curious to hear Councilmember Wilsey's thoughts on just kind of what would be most clear on the, you know, whether it's the 5 to 10 or the 6 to 10, just because I do want to make sure that's completely clear to both residents and developers. I think this did an okay job of doing it, but I'll be curious to hear Councilmember Wilsey's thoughts. And my last one is regarding the street widening. Yes, those pictures definitely did not look good. I can actually show some pictures on Woodstock where there was an extra foot, and it does look a lot better. You can see when you look at it, you can see the concrete looks a little different, but at the same time, there's nothing growing in between. So that's one example of kind of where I've kind of formed my opinion is I've got a couple different parts of Woodstock Road I've seen that did just have an extension. Number 2 is I know in areas where it's you know, much longer, worse winter conditions where there's a lot of snow and ice constantly. Even though the sidewalk is public right of way, the person in the house is required to make sure that it's not ice, so they need to shovel the sidewalk. And what I'm wondering is there the opportunity to give a requirement that the sidewalk needs to be taken care of, pull those weeds out, for example, or spray those weeds. And the reason I bring it up is I would like to make it easier for homeowners, or more realistically for developers. They want to be on that collector road. It has a 5-foot sidewalk already. I'd prefer to find a solution where they can just do an extension and not have to rip up the 5-foot part. I'd rather just see them need to safely, with high quality, build that extra foot or that extra 3 feet if it's on the master plan. So again, I'll go with whatever way this council feels, but for me, I'm certainly in the camp of of wanting to create a code and solution that does just let us build the addition, but do it in a safe way that doesn't create the opportunity for those two pictures. So, so I'd love to have that discussion today or another time.
Any further questions or comments?
No, I just,
Councilmember Zapata?
Thank you. So I have a question. I see a lot of range, like in sidewalks and another part of the concept here. What happened on the range? Who decide about the range when you have 5 to 10, 6 to 12? Who will decide that based on what? And how easy it will be to resolve any differences between the person who is required to do a sidewalk, but then the person who will decide what is the width of the sidewalk. Can you explain a little more about how to resolve these kind of differences in the case that, let's say, someone wants to do a 5, but then it's required 10? I mean, how do you deal with this situation on the range among all the different ranges that I saw here in your presentation?
Sure, so let me try and answer that just by walking through this one graphic. We've provided 2 ranges here. For D sidewalk, we're showing 5 to 10 feet, and then for travel lane, we're showing 10, 12, or 13. The intent on these graphics, I'll talk to G first. So G, travel lane, those are dimensions that are based on International Fire Code guidelines, and it's dependent on whether there is gutter, and it's dependent on the height of the buildings. So it would be very complicated for us to start providing 3 different versions or 4 different versions of all the different iterations of building height, no gutter, and road to show you how that would be either 10 or 12 or 13. When an application comes through plan review with our review through the fire marshal's office, the fire marshal is very clear in based on the details of the application, we indicate to them whether the minimum travel lane that we would accept in this graphic would either be 10 or 12 or 13. And the purpose of these changes that we have talked to you about today is there have been many situations, our city engineer and our deputy director of community development are very aware of these. Based on current code, there has been situations come up where a application meets the street type section in the UDC, but does not meet the fire marshal's requirements for International Fire Code. And what we're doing is to try and provide more uniform guidelines to show a applicant looking at this graphic, they can be more confident that they are meeting both and that they won't have a situation come up where they meet one where they conflict with the other. Very commonly, the way it goes is they will meet transportation, but they will not meet fire marshal. Rarely it would basically meet fire marshal and not meet transportation, but typically it's the first way. There are very, very strict guidelines for road width, again, based on the presence of gutter and based on the height of the building itself, that the International Fire Code requires a minimum road width. And the way this graphic is shown, G is the travel lane. So if you look at the graphic, at the picture up at the top of the screen, G is the travel lane. It's not necessarily the entire road. So it's not the width from the base of curb to base of curb. It's just the travel lane. That's why in this graphic, it's shown at either 10 to 12 to 13. I hope that's a little bit more clear. For D, for sidewalk, the reason why it is provided as a range in this graphic is to provide better guidance to an applicant to make sure that they are checking UDC 1141F and are aware of the hub and spoke map and are aware that their application may be triggered to do a 10-foot sidewalk and will not be adequate to do a 5-foot sidewalk. So we're indicating here as in a range. That's not something that staff will interpret at all, specific to this graphic, Councilmember Zapata. That is a minimum 5-foot sidewalk that we would expect them to build on both sides as the graphic indicates, and will only be increased to 10 feet if they are on the hub and spoke map where code requires it, or if there is a discussion of conditions and it's a project that ultimately is reviewed by you, and we as a city decide that to apply a wider width than the minimum, which would either be 5 if they're not on the hub and spoke map, or 10 if they are.
Thank you.
Any further questions or comments? What's the pleasure of the council?
I have a question.
Councilor Hall.
Thank you. I just want to be clear that the sidewalk application of how we add the additional foot, if we have to, is not part of this item if we move it forward. Is that correct?
Sorry, I was muted there. Councilmember Hall, that our application of sidewalk widening is going to maintain the same as we've done for the past 10 plus years, unless we hear consistent guidance otherwise. We're not recommending any change to that as part of this item. All this item includes are the graphics that I just shown you and that were included in your packet. Any guidance we received from you, we will bring forward to council meeting for initiation if that's what the motion reflects.
Councilor Palermo.
And as I mentioned earlier, I certainly believe and support that we should make it easier to widen a sidewalk versus having to tear up a good sidewalk and not widen it. But nonetheless, that belief is not going to stop me from supporting these other changes to make sure we're in line with the fire code.
Councilor Woolsey.
Yes, thank you, Gary. Rob, does it make sense to move these forward independently of the others that are coming back? Because if you're comfortable with that, I would make a motion to move to initiate.
Councilmember Woolsey, we're good either way. If you want to defer all three to keep them lumped together, or you want to advance this one and keep the other one deferred, that's fine as well. We'll follow whatever path you want.
I recommend we keep them together.
This going forward.
Councilor Hall, go ahead. Can you repeat that again, please?
I'm sorry. I was just going to suggest that we go ahead and move this one forward if I can have a second and agreement.
There's a motion on the floor to move this item forward to the September 14th Mayor and Council meeting for initiation. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Second by Councilmember Woolsey. Any further discussion or questions? All in favor, please raise your hands. It is unanimous. Thank you. Item number 9, discussion, item number 8, consideration of initiation of the text amendment to section 11.4 streets to remove 3 street types. Mr. Del Ross.
Thank you, Gary. Last item you can see on the screen, these are the sections that we presented for you for deletion at the work session. We have made changes to this and I'll point those out. So again, the recap, the exact same work session date you saw before. We are recommending deleting 3 of the 5 sections that we showed you at the July work session. We have dropped 2 sections from this list based on the feedback we received from you July. So we are not deleting the lunar section. If you remember what that looks like, that was the European shared narrow street. That is not on today's list. And we are also not proposing to delete the pedestrian passageway, the section that we discussed in July. The other three sections that we brought forward at work session are remaining, and I'll show you what those three are. The first section, this is per our discussion in the item about 30 minutes ago, this is a traditional rural section with very wide right-of-way and significant drainage ditches across the right-of-way. This is, versions of this are present in the city, but most notably, you'll see many roads like this more present up in the city of Milton and up in the unincorporated Cherokee County. This is a traditional two-lane rural section sitting on 80 feet, 100 feet of right-of-way that we just don't typically have in the city. There is, trying to answer questions that I think will come up here in a minute, there is no harm to leave this in. This is a recommendation from staff to delete because being upfront with you, we have not been using it very often in our discussions, both with single family homes and with development applications. This section has not been falling into the discussions very much, so we are asking to delete it. The second section, this was the discussion, Councilmember Zapata, we had talked about this back in July work session. This is the section that was created by the Dwani study for State Route 9 approximately, I'm going to say 7 years ago. This was a graphic that the Dwani study proposed that is the only reason why it is currently in our document. The vision here would be a 4-lane state route, as you can see, with a tree line median in the middle, with tree line separation outside of the travel lanes and long sections of angled parking basically inside the right of way, kind of we call it a boulevard style. This was a graphic just to basically acknowledge that that was a study that was presented, and we did not know at the time whether this was going to be applied to any sections of our city. Since the UDC was first adopted, we have not seen any use of this section. It has not come up in conversations with developers. From staff's point of view, there are two negatives to this section that we wanted to make you aware of. First off, the extremely large right-of-way footprint that something like this would take up. So theoretically, if we were to build something like this, the right-of-way would be the face of building. So you would be looking at a 4-lane roadway section with a median down the middle, another buffer between the travel lanes and parking, and then you have two basically aisles of parking with a furniture zone / sidewalk outside those parking, and then basically the face building. So that you can imagine the right of way from face building to face building is fairly large in this section. The other big negative staff sees to this is the feasibility, and in order for something like this to really function well and operate well, this section is not something that one parcel can choose to do. In order for something like this to operate well, this would have to be, I mean, honestly, a quarter mile to a significant assemblage of property with a long frontage along a state route in order for that parking area, even on one side, to have any benefit and to be used with any common use. For those reasons, we would like to go ahead and delete it. There is nothing wrong with keeping it in if you would like to. We are recommending to delete it based on those two reasons. The third section, I do not have a good explanation for you for why this is currently in the code, but we're asking you to delete it. The applicability for what you see on the screen and whether it matches a road currently in the city, I can't give you an example of this. The idea would be that this is a 2-lane, probably a little bit more industrial feel, 2-lane with bike lanes and a large area in between the roadway and a sidewalk to accommodate large overhead utility lines. For very similar reasons to the previous discussions, since the UDC has been adopted, this is not a section that has come up in conversation either with staff or with applicants. We just simply aren't using it. So that is the primary reason why we are asking to delete it today. Again, review of process, if moved forward to council for initiation, we would then go to planning commission, followed by first and second reading. That concludes my presentation, and we're open to questions.
Councilmember Palermo.
Thank you. So I'd say with this, on the third one, I'm indifferent if this council wants to delete or this council wants to keep. I'm indifferent. The first two, I do not support deleting. I completely understand that it's not feasible and we shouldn't necessarily just expect it's going to automatically come or anything like that. But I just don't see the risk or the issue of keeping it in there in case, you know, there's some creative, you know, interesting use that none of us have thought of or other developers haven't thought of, just to keep it in there for flexibility because it's not doing any harm. So I don't see the value in going through a, you know, two readings to just take away some choices.
Councilmember Woolsey.
Yeah, I also could imagine some interest possibly in the future for design number 2, especially if it could be applied to some areas of Holcomb Bridge if they were to be redeveloped in the future. So, I mean, that's one that I would want to discuss a little bit more with transportation, maybe separately, to see what, but that one, I think there might be some application in the future.
Respond.
Thank you. So the only reason to remove 3 street types is just because they're not in use right now and they don't cause any harm. To keep them in there, I think that we should just, you know, move on and don't, I mean, doesn't cause harm. It's not in use right now. So I don't see the point to be talking too much about removing these three street types. So that is my point.
Any further questions or comments? For a motion?
What would be appropriate?
Based on that, we will not move this forward for council initiation, and we will not bring it back to committee.
Thanks, Rob. Moving on to item number 9, discussion of the sidewalk program policy to determine new measures to prioritize sidewalk projects. Mr.
Thank you, Gary. We need to set you right here. We're going to be transferring over to Dave Cox for the next item.
Thanks.
Well, good morning, Mayor and Council. I hope you can see my screen appropriately. We had to make a couple changes here. Let's do this. There. You can see my screen, correct? Yeah, I can't. No one responded.
What's up, Dan?
All right, you can see my screen, correct?
Yep.
All right, thank you. Sorry about that. Okay, so every few years we like to revisit the sidewalk matrix and how we prioritize sidewalks in the city of Roswell. Recently in December 2019, the mayor and council adopted the bicycle and pedestrian master plan. And one of the tasks within that study was to look at our criteria and how we score and rank projects. We wanted to share that with you earlier this year, but this has been a strange year to say the least. So we're finally getting around to updating you. Just to give you a quick background on where we were 5 years ago, prior to 2015, we didn't have a prioritization method. And at that time, staff was tasked with coming up with a process that was data-driven to help rank and prioritize our sidewalks. Staff did two big efforts. One was to do a kind of research assignment, have a peer review, looking at best practices and what other cities and counties and governments were doing around the country. And then the second part of that was doing a big heavy lift on generating an inventory of all the sidewalk gaps in our city, looking at all the data associated with them and coming up with some plane level cost estimates. So that was a big effort 5 years ago. And then the kind of sausage making process started where we had several meetings with the mayor and council to go over all the criteria, some of the alternatives, and there's a lot of conversation, and the mayor and council adopted the way we prioritize sidewalks back in 2015. So here's where we are today. We have over 200 miles of sidewalks in the city. This is all the blue lines on the map. Some of the multi-use trails are also in park areas, mainly along the river. They're showing up in green. But this is kind of the 30,000 foot view of our sidewalk network, and it actually looks pretty good when you look at it this way. However, there are still some gaps out there. We are still tracking over 130 gaps across the city, about 38 miles of them. And if you, using our planning level numbers from a few years ago, the total cost to build them all could be approximately $47 million. So there's still a lot of work to be done. Just to give you some recent success stories, I'll just spend a few seconds on this. Here's some recent sidewalk gaps we filled. This is up on Highway 140, Arnold Mill Road, near the Kroger, right there by the silos. This is a little sidewalk gap that was really driving us crazy because it was right on the city limit sign, welcome to Roswell, sidewalk gap. So we got that filled. This is another big one on Mansell Road. This is right between Highway 9 and Howes Road. If you were the one taking these photos and you spun around the Starbucks and the, I believe it's the Sprouts shopping centers right behind you. This one we're really proud of because this was the last sidewalk gap on Mansell Road. We've got the other ones plugged down by Highway 92, Crossville Road. Developer put one in nearby, and this is the last stretch. So Mansell Road, from the sidewalk perspective, is done from Crossville Road all the way to the outside of city limits. And lastly, here's one up on Old Roswell Road. This is up near Hembry Road, near the Harlow development. This is a really neat one because we got two done at the same time. We were able to save some money on deployment cost and some of our bidding as we got two done. This is also really nice. This is, I forget the name of the amphitheater, the old, it was Verizon Wireless Amphitheater. The back entrance is right up here. So we've had a lot of compliments on this one for people living nearby in Harlow that they can walk to the amphitheater. But that's assuming they're actually playing live music, which they're not these days, but we hope they'll be back soon. So how we got here, here are the 8 criteria that the mayor and council approved in 2015. I'll briefly go over these just to give you some background. Over here you can see the number of points each item receives, but I want to explain each of the criteria one by one. The perceived safety issue, this is basically a staff person making a judgment call. They'll go out on site, they'll review it, and they will basically determine how safe or unsafe they feel and award points based on that. It's a very human interpretation. We have some recommendations on maybe putting a better data metric in its place. We'll talk about that later. We also have another safety element, the average 85th percentile speed. This is a metric that transportation tracks and we share with police. on where speeding is occurring. We have some known areas in Roswell where speeding is pretty prevalent, primarily due to our terrain. The cars seem to like to go really fast on those downhill segments, and we have some pedestrian needs on those areas. The next three are basically proximity. The sidewalk gap is near a public school, a Roswell City Park, or near a commercial business or development. They also receive points just for, we want pedestrians to be able to access those facilities. The next one is a worn path. Sometimes it's called a desire path or a cattle trail. We call them goat trails at the staff level. This is basically when you're driving down the road and you see the little grassy patch on the side of the road and there's clear evidence of human foot traffic. So that's a good, it's a very low-tech metric to use, but it's actually a good indicator of pedestrian demand. This next one is a little more complicated. We don't have a good name for it. We just say, is a sidewalk on the other side of the road or not? And what that means is, let's say you live on a collector street. Let's just say you live on Pine Grove Road and you don't have a sidewalk in your front yard. You would have a sidewalk gap, and that would get points in our system. However, if across the street from you, there is a sidewalk, your sidewalk gap would still get points in our system, but it would get fewer points because there's a sidewalk across the street. The logic would say the pedestrian may be inclined to cross the street to go use the sidewalk. That's not always the safest option, especially on a road like Pine Grove, where traffic volumes are involved and may not be feasible for a pedestrian to want to cross or even legally cross because they're supposed to be using a crosswalk. So we have a couple recommendations we'll talk about in a minute to maybe correct this or make it kind of more logical. And then lastly is our sidewalk gap on the hub and spoke system, and I have a map to show that here in a few minutes. Rob was talking about the hub and spoke system earlier, which was adopted by the Mayor and Council last December, which is a map of our multi-use trail systems. So here is the pie chart. You're going to see several pie charts in a minute. I'm just warning you. This is basically how our points are weighted currently. This assumes your sidewalk gets the full amount of points for each of these criteria. Some of them, about 20%, are safety factors, while the remaining 80 are based on accessibility. One thing as we go forward, I just want everyone to be mindful of is if we start adding a lot of new criteria, this will start to dilute these weight ratings. You'll see these little slices of pie get skinnier and skinnier, and I'll point that out later. But that's just something we need to be mindful as we start to, if we decide to tweak any of these criteria. Some of the other criteria we do track, but we do not score are these listed here. I'm not going to go over all of them. We do track them just for our records. One thing I want to draw attention to is number 7. That's the capital projects and developer opportunity. We have several sidewalk gaps around the city that may be targets of future development. A lot of developers have to install sidewalks for us. And also we have other roadway projects, capital projects that GDOT may be building or the city transportation department may be building. We don't want to spend our precious sidewalk dollars on a new sidewalk that could possibly get torn up in a few years by another project, or we don't want to spend our sidewalk dollars on a stretch of sidewalk that a developer is likely to build for us. We want to kind of maximize our resources. So that's just something I want to point out, but I'll be glad to answer any questions about these later on. So getting into the analysis from the bike ped plan that was approved last December. I'm going to go over these briefly one by one and give staff's recommendation, and then we can talk more about that at the end during the question and answer. The first one goes back to which side of the road the sidewalk's on. This was a little kind of confusing one. I wanted to explain a little better. This has to do with, if you live on one side of the road and you don't have a sidewalk in your front yard, but there's one across the street, are you more likely to cross the busy street to go use it? That's one we wanted to kind of take another look at. And when we met with the Mayor and Council during our committee meeting in June, we had a lot of great feedback. And one of the comments we heard from the Mayor and Council in June was, we need to include traffic volumes. Is there a way to include traffic volumes for safety? One of the things that we looked at on this one was, Are you going to cross a busy street to access a sidewalk? Well, if it's a really busy road, it's going to be pretty unsafe, and that's not a good factor. And we don't want to inadvertently penalize a sidewalk gap in the points department if it's a very busy road. One example, I mentioned Pine Grove Road earlier. Another one is Norcross Street, right out here in front of City Hall by the library. There's a sidewalk on one side of Norcross, but not on the other. And it's not very feasible for a pedestrian to cross a busy road like Norcross that I believe has over 10,000 or 12,000 cars a day to go use the sidewalk to walk up to Canton Street. So what we're recommending is maybe basically put a threshold of maybe 10,000 vehicles a day, and if the road has that traffic volume, you don't deduct points from the sidewalk gap, even if there's a sidewalk across the street from you. That would kind of make it more fair based on safety. Another thing we're considering is, if you remember my opening remarks, we talked about one of the factors is kind of a perceived safety factor, which is basically a human element. Staff would go out there and just kind of make a gut call on how safe or unsafe they feel. We could replace that with a traffic metric based on the traffic volume. So we could do one or both of those things. So that we thought those may be some positive ideas to shore up our criteria. Another one was maybe coordinate more with our comp plan and land use. We looked at the character areas that we have around the city of Roswell. They're identified in our comp plan. After review, staff are recommending not including those, mainly because our character areas around the city are on primarily our commercial corridors, and we already reward or heavily weight sidewalk gaps that are in our commercial corridors or near businesses. The other factor was there aren't very many sidewalk gaps left on our commercial corridors, so there wasn't a lot of added value to this. So we decided to not recommend this one, but we're definitely open to discussing it further. The third one is factoring in population density. You obviously want to get the most bang for your buck with your sidewalk money. So we thought, could we factor in where the most people are? And we could use census data to better determine that. This map is basically showing census block groups, and this is showing density for each of those census blocks. The darker the shade of, this looks like purple, the darker the shade indicates the more heavy population density. And then these really aren't a surprise, you know, that we actually have some very heavily dense clusters, nearly 400, Holcomb Bridge interchange, as well as a few other parcels. So this may be something we could factor in and just give a few points to for sidewalk gaps in these areas, just because there's a lot more people in them. Another recommendation, this is a pretty simple one. This has to do with the Roswell hub and spoke system, which is our approved multi-use trail map. The good news is we already reward points to sidewalks that are on the hub and spoke system. That was approved last December. The only recommendation here is to maybe add some extra points to sidewalks that may lead to and from it, that, you know, connect to it or touch it. So that's just kind of a secondary thing we could add. It might be just a very minor point system, but it may be worth adding. And when we spoke to the Mayor and Council in June, we had a few questions on the hub and spoke map. Here is just a recap. Here's what the map looks like. Here's the citywide map. The yellow or orange dotted lines are the planned spokes. And just a reminder, these are multi-use trails. They're anticipated to be upwards of 10 feet wide. These are wide sidewalks, basically. And they're called multi-use because they're not just for pedestrians, they're for pedestrians and cyclists can legally operate on them. So the orange dotted lines are what is proposed or planned in our network. The green lines are what we either already have on the ground or what are considered part of committed projects. And the whole goal of this was to better connect the hubs of Roswell. Those are the kind of gray circles you see on the map. Those are our activity centers. And we also wanted to connect to our neighboring communities such as Cobb County or Alpharetta or other places. So that's what this map shows, and I'll be glad to answer questions about that at the end. Just a couple more. We also want to consider transit feasibility and how they connect to sidewalks. One of the big planning terms is last mile connectivity. So you want transit riders to have better access to their homes or to transit stops. So you definitely want to have good sidewalks and pedestrian facilities to reach those. What we're proposing is merging transit with our commercial corridors. We already award points to sidewalk gaps near commercial businesses or better access them. So we figured we could merge these because they kind of overlap. And just to kind of show you a map of MARTA's bus routes, these show the three MARTA bus routes, the 85, the 185, and the 142. Just as a reminder, 2 of MARTA's bus routes are currently not running due to the pandemic and some budget shortfalls, but we're hoping they'll be reinstated soon. And then these circles are basically MARTA boarding and deboarding data that we received back in December before the pandemic hit. The larger the circle, the more transit ridership exists at those MARTA bus stops. But if you notice, they're on Highway 9 and Holcomb Bridge and Mansell Road. We already have a lot of commercial businesses that already receive points in our sidewalk system. There are a couple of places, I believe, in East Roswell that don't have, they're outside that quarter-mile radius of commercial businesses, but the MARTA bus stops would help fill in those gaps and may reward more points to that if that's something we consider. So we definitely want to consider transit in our system. And then lastly, the last recommendation, we had some good discussion back in June with the Mayor and Council on. We wanted to talk about how we could better use cost estimates in our ranking system. So there's a couple of things to talk about here. One thing is, in our scoring matrix, we have a lot of ties. There's a lot of sidewalks and a lot of them have the exact same score. So one idea we've already started implementing was to use the cost estimate as a tiebreaker, with the lower cost being higher, ranking higher. So we're already doing that today. Another one that we need to do is at the staff level, we need to go and update all of our planning level estimates. A lot of them were done a few years ago. We need to dust those off because obviously trends in the construction industry change. And then also because of the multi-use path trail map that you saw as part of the hub and spoke system now implies we have 10-foot wide sidewalks. And you were talking with Rob earlier about how that will affect cost estimates. For every foot or two of sidewalk you add, you may impact a lot more things such as, a tree canopy, or you might need more earthwork or retaining walls, or there may be utility impacts. So wider sidewalks will definitely drive up your costs. So staff need to sharpen our pencils on a lot of our cost estimates moving forward over the next several months, regardless of what we talk about today. And then the other thing, the big one is number 2 here on the screen. We wanted to maybe give more emphasis on our lower cost sidewalk projects. And one of the things the staff kind of did our homework on over the past couple months was, do we want to set a threshold and only target sidewalks that are below $300,000? I don't want to call them the low-hanging fruit, but if we target those, we could get a lot more done over the next decade or more. The other thing is I want to point out is if we did implement some kind of threshold or condition, we would still rank and track all of our projects. All the sidewalk projects, even the expensive ones, we'd still monitor and track. But the idea was we could target those using other funding sources. We could target, do them as part of other roadway projects. If there's a GDOT project, we would obviously have GDOT have our sidewalks and multi-use paths included. And we can also use those with other funding sources, whether it be federal grants, state funds, or if it was another local source, such as a bond or a future T-SPLOS tax. So we could still use that kind of funding for the bigger ticket projects, but for our city budget's annual allotment for sidewalks, we would consider maybe doing just the lower cost projects. And the reason we picked $300,000 was we looked at all the estimates of our projects, and over half of them were below the $300,000 threshold. We did have some bigger ticket projects. 14% of them were over 600,000, and about a third of them were between 300 and 600,000. But the overwhelming share of our sidewalks are smaller. They're sidewalk gaps, right? So over half of them were under 300,000. So that's kind of how we got to that number. We also found that if you look at the overall cost of our whole program, if you targeted just the sidewalks under 300,000, you would knock the program total down to 12 million in today's dollars. So given our sidewalk budget, annually kind of bounces around based on our budget conditions, it could be anywhere from a few $100,000 to $1 million. You could knock out a significant part of the program in a decade. But that's only going after the lower cost projects. And again, we would still track all of the projects, even the higher dollar ones, just using other funding sources. So we're getting close to the end, I promise. But we wanted to go over a few draft scenarios with you. When we met with the mayor and council in June, we were given marching orders to come up with some draft scenarios for your review today. And we kind of played around with a few scoring metrics, and we basically wanted to show the top 20 projects. The council advised us in June to not focus on the entire sidewalk list, not all 130 projects, but maybe just focus on the top 20 to give you kind of a peek of what it would look like. So we did our homework and put this together for you. Here's scenario one. We do nothing. We leave everything in the program as is. I'm not going to go over all the criteria again, but just basically leave everything as is, and your scoring criteria will look like this. This is what the current matrix looks like. I know we're going to have a lot of questions on this, so definitely let me know which slide you have a question about, and I put slide numbers on most of these. But we can definitely talk about whatever project you might want to discuss and how it scores. But this is what the current matrix looks like. So scenario two is basically the exact same thing. It is a cost ceiling approach. It's basically the same criteria. We just add one new condition. And that is what we talked about a minute ago with we insert an artificial cost threshold of $300,000. We'd still track all the projects, all 133 of them, but we would only pursue the lower cost projects using our annual allotment of city funding. And basically what that would do is here's what your matrix would look like. And if you note over on the right-hand side, you can see the total score along with your planning level cost estimates. You can see they're all below $300,000. You still see a lot of the same roadways: Holcomb Bridge, Old Alabama, Steeplechase, Crabapple, Pine Grove. You still see a lot of the same projects in there, but these are just your lower dollar projects. Scenario three, I'm going to warn you, this is the most colorful pie chart you will see today. This is what I was talking about in my intro, was if we start adding too many criteria, you're going to see the weights of these get a little diluted. You can see some of the criteria, the percentages drop down into the single digits. So that's something we could do this, but there may be some, we might have to do some tinkering with the scoring if we go with an option like this. And basically what we did here was we kept 5 of the criteria as is, don't touch them. We added 2 new ones. We decided in this scenario to give points to the lower cost projects. And we also added population density based on where a lot of our people are. Sidewalk gaps in those areas would receive affirmative points. And then we modified 3 others. We included the transit component with our commercial corridors, and we added traffic volumes to 2 of them. We added traffic volumes to our perceived safety, and we added traffic volumes into that one where I talked about which side of the road the sidewalk gap is on. So you can see here, this is one way to do it. And once you crank out the scores, they look like this. You see a lot of different projects here. So the score numbers are a little higher, the total scores are a little bit higher, but you have all the projects in there. And then lastly, I'm almost done, I promise. Scenario 4, this is the scaled back approach. In June, some council members asked us, hey, why don't we try addition by subtraction? Why don't we just focus on the core criteria? And we can talk about what those 4 or 5 or 6 criteria are. But in June, we heard focus on schools and parks. We want to focus more on sidewalks that connect our residents to our schools and parks. So that's what we did here. So we use that in this example. We also added in the desire path or go trail. And we also added in if it's on the hub and spoke map, since that was recently adopted by the mayor and council last December. So we focused on these 4 key elements. We weighted them equally, and this was the result. Here's what the scoring looks like under this approach, and we can go back to this during the Q&A. The one unintended consequence of this, if you notice over on the far right-hand side, the total score, you'll notice a lot of round numbers. Now, granted, we just broke the 4 categories into equal weighted scoring, so you have a lot of ties. All the numbers are 10, 20, or 30. So that may pose a problem that we would have to work around if we went with something like this. But that was just kind of an interesting little fact that we found. So next steps, as I mentioned, staff, we need to sharpen our pencils on doing updating cost estimates for just the general construction trends of the day. Also looking at a multi-use paths, we have some wider sidewalks we need to account for, so we're definitely going to be doing that in the next several months. Also based on some of the UDC discussion we had an hour ago, we may need to assume some wider sidewalks, 6-foot sidewalks versus 5, that there may be some impacts there based on tree canopy, earthwork, or utility impacts. So we'll definitely be doing that moving forward. And then we basically need to get a lot of your input on how we want to sort this criteria out. Do we want to make changes or just leave things as is? And we really look forward to getting your guidance today in the future on how we can make this a better program. So with that, I'll yield for questions and discussion.
Floor is open. Councilmember Tizer.
Thank you. I saw the number 47.2 million is the total amount, which based on how many we do a year is somewhere between 47 and 94 years worth of project list. So sorting these becomes very important. You've given us 4 or 5 different versions, and just glancing at them, a lot of the same projects here on all of the lists. And I think that would be something that I'd be interested in seeing. Really all that matters to most of us is what can be done in the next few years. So what I'd love to see us do is do 2 things. One is to take that whole bunch of lists that you just presented with the different options, and let's see which ones appear in the top, 5 or 10, 15 every single time. And that ought to start to tell us that no matter what method you use to sort, these ones keep coming to the top. So let's find a way to fund and do them. And the second thing that I probably might make some sense to do is, let's say we approved all of your recommendations. What does the ranking list look like then? So again, two things. One is, what are the common top several that hit each of your lists and each of your options? And then second, if we approved all of your lists, what would it look like? What would all of your requests, what would the list look like? And I think those would be very insightful, because I think what we're going to see is, no matter which way you do this, the ones that we can do in the next 1 to 5 years, I think look like, just glancing at it, going to be the same ones. And I think that becomes very helpful for us in action, in putting together some action.
Councilmember Woolsey.
Thank you, and thanks for all the work and all the different scenarios. I have a question on scenario 1, specifically on the Atlanta Street, Highway 9. That project, I assume that the sidewalks there are a part of that project, correct? That are funded by T-SPLOST?
Yes, the sidewalk projects on Highway 9, I'm assuming you're referring to, I can pull it up here.
It's to number 2 on scenario 1.
Can you see that?
Yes.
Yes. So number 2, Atlanta Street. This is from Sandy Springs up to Chattahoochee Circle. That's correct. This would be part of this. I'm sorry.
Oh, sure. And then also number 11 and 12.
Yes. So those are all sidewalk gaps we track, and we are aware that there are some capital projects that would build a lot of these sidewalks. So that's one thing we track at staff is If there's a GDOT project or a Roswell transportation project that would build sidewalks for us, we wouldn't use our local annual allotment of sidewalk funds to build these sidewalks now. We obviously don't want to build a sidewalk that could get torn up in 2 or 5 years. So we track those carefully, but we still do rank them. We still include them on our matrix for tracking purposes.
I guess my suggestion is if there's some way to note that under this scenario, it would help us to focus on the smaller gap projects that we can accomplish. I think would help, because I think we are making progress on those.
Yeah, we do track all of those items. We just don't, that's in the staff's version of the matrix. We don't show that to the public facing, but that's something we could definitely talk about internally.
Sure. Okay, great. Thank you.
Councilmember Palermo.
Thank you. I think Councilmember Wilsey and I are on the same wavelength today, because actually I agree with that 100%. And I think that should be on the public version. So if we anticipate the sidewalks coming in through a capital project or anywhere else, I think it makes sense to keep it on the matrix as you do, but I think it should be notated for us all to be able to see anytime.
Councilmember Hall.
Thank you, Gary. I just would like to be clear that under the unchanged scenario, it's unchanged other than the new criteria that are recommended in the scoring. Is that correct?
So the unchanged criteria, that criteria 1 that I showed, that's currently how we do it today. We haven't added anything new to that. That's what the sidewalk matrix looks like today.
Okay. However, you suggested different ways of measuring to arrive at the total score. So the total scoring applies to all scenarios, the suggested new method of total scoring. Is that correct?
Yes, so each item has a different selection of points, 1, 3, or 5, and that feeds into those total scores. For those other scenarios I displayed, 2, 3, and 4, we did, kind of artificially insert some draft point systems, so that altered the scores a little bit. That's just one of the things we kind of had to do for this planning exercise, but we can definitely refine and change those as needed. But everything in scenario 1 was what it was adopted by the council in 2015.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Judy.
So transportation, great job on these. Very thorough, very thinking outside the box. I guess I'm finding it hard to figure out what's best right now, being as we're in such economic uncertainty. I think after Q1 review and looking at where our new short-term reality might be, might help. I am initially drawn to the $300,000 and less project menu to try to get some things moving, unless there's some really groundbreaking changes we can do with a larger amount of money. There again, that takes us off the path of of larger projects. But again, if our economic reality is we're going to have limited budgets, I'd rather get some stuff completed rather than sit and wait till we have enough money to do the larger projects. So for me, I think I will be able, after we get our first couple economic updates after the quarters, make a better decision here. But right now, I'm kind of leaning to that 300,000 and less project list and looking at that. That's just my point of view this morning.
Councilmember Spada.
Thank you. So, well, yeah, great job to explain a very complex analysis. It's a lot of variables. So I'm trying to, in one side we have the cost, on the other side we have the high benefit for the community, and then the high benefit for the community divided on what you call the score criteria, which is very clear, and especially if we can add there the public transportation in terms of stops and ridership level and the population density into these core criteria, that would be great. And also, I noticed that public schools and city parks from a quarter of a mile, they get only 5 points. And I think that, I believe that they deserve higher points for being proximal to public schools and city parks. So, my point today is focusing on scoring criteria. Once we tailor this perfectly, then the rest will be just fitting on the different cells of the matrix according with the scale in cost and a scale on high benefit for the community. So I don't know if this council wants to review the scoring criteria or not. I would suggest that we do and contemplate, like I said, public school and city parks giving more points and include public transportation in terms of stops and ridership level and the population density. I don't know what the pleasure of this council is regarding the scoring criteria.
Any further questions or comments? Councilor Hall.
I would support having a revisit of the scoring criteria based on the recommendations of staff as they suggested adding safety for the number of cars per day, and also with what Council Member Zapata just suggested, public transit.
Councilor Palermo.
Thank you. I agree with what Councilman Judy said about kind of leaning towards the under 300,000 type examples. I agree with that thought process. I also agree with Councilman Zapata's thought process of slightly revisiting some of the aspects, on the things he mentioned. So I think I'm hearing a lot of good points today.
Councilor Woolsey.
Yes, thank you. I mean, one thing that I would like to take a look at, specifically if we're looking at the smaller dollar projects, is to look at where there are actual gaps. I know there are a couple of things on Holcomb Bridge and different areas of the city. I think we can accomplish a lot if we're filling in an actual gap, connecting sidewalks that are existing. So maybe that's another way to prioritize with limited funds. I guess, and then also I'd like to suggest if we could all take a closer look at this and discuss it, take a look at what the budgets are going to be for Q1, and then perhaps bring this back to committee, next month. I think we've got a lot to think about. I'm not sure that we're going to come up with any concrete decisions today.
I agree.
Dave, how much time you guys need to bring something back to continue the discussion? Dave,
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
how much time do you guys need to bring this back to continue the discussion?
Just based on the comments we heard, it may be feasible to wait till after the Q1 budget review. I may have the date wrong, but I believe the work session or meeting is later in October, possibly.
Yeah.
Also, I'm going to be out of the office for the next September committee meeting, so it may be better to wait till later in the autumn, if that's appropriate.
Councilor Zapata.
Thank you. So, I would like to encourage to bring back sooner than later the discussion about the criteria, because criteria is what define everything. Once you have a criteria of anything, the rest will follow and go into different cells on the matrix. So once you have clear the criteria and agree, and then you move forward. So moving forward with the criteria that is not 100% there, then I don't know where you're going. I like to form criteria first and then go for it. So I think that bringing just the criteria for it, we don't need 200 pages presentation discussion, just the criteria, which is pretty much the one of the slides that was presented today, I think that this will be a great starting point just to then allocate the projects and see if it's a gap between sidewalks and there is a warm path in between those two sidewalks. On the gap between the two sidewalks, if a warm path, that makes sense. If it's not a warm path, maybe there's just two sidewalks not connected but not much in use. So I think that, defining clearly and the most comprehensive and realistic criteria is the starting point. And we don't have to go through, again, 200 slides or even close to that. Just need to focus on the scoring criteria slide to see if there's an agreement improving the criteria.
Any further questions or comments? All right, thanks, Dave. Moving on to item number 2, consideration of a resolution of support for the city of Roswell as a walkable community. Mr. Ralph or Mr. Powell?
Gary, I'm going to handle that one. This will just take a brief moment. Let me pull it up. So the walk-friendly community resolution, staff is proposing that for a couple reasons. So just to give you some background, as you know, Roswell's been designated as a bicycle-friendly community. We've received that several years ago, if not more than 10 years ago. There was another opportunity for the city to become a walk-friendly community. There's an organization that officially designates those cities nationally. Currently, the only 2 cities in the state of Georgia are Atlanta and Decatur, with Decatur being the only one that is both walk-friendly and bicycle-friendly. So we had applied here at the city of Roswell. We applied back in 2007. We received an honorable mention, and they gave us some very valuable feedback on how to reapply in the future. So one of the key steps was to do a bike ped plan, which we've done. The mayor and council adopted that last winter. And another recommendation from them was to officially adopt a resolution supporting walking and pedestrian safety, and for staff to consider signing the International Charter for Walking. And all that is basically an organization called Walk 21, which is an international advocacy group. So it's also considered a charity in some areas because they donate funds to different things. But we're just basically recommending that the mayor and council approve a resolution that lets staff sign this. It's kind of a non-binding initiative. But the good news is staff already takes into account basically all of these criteria during the planning process for our road projects and our bike and pedestrian safety projects. So with your approval, we'd like to bring the resolution forward to the council at a later date, as there is just basically a feather in our cap that we can use to apply when we apply for the walk-friendly community designation later this winter. And there's no financial impact to the city, and if approved, we would bring this to a future council meeting.
Thanks, Dave. Councilmember Judy.
Motion to approve. We all want us to be walking friendly.
Motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Tizer. Any further questions or comments?
Yes, so I'm definitely glad to see support for this. I'm really hopeful and think it's important that we're not just voting in this as a document, but we're truly following it. And as we have discussions with RDOT, ComDev in the community, that we're consciously thinking about this and making sure we're making strides in the right direction, that we truly are following the philosophy and not just for the certification.
Thank you. Any additional questions or comments? All in favor, please raise your hands. It is unanimous. Thank you. And we are adjourned. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Have a good day.